this to me is like the really fascinating material.
We don't know what the answer is, but we're looking for patterns.
I think we're looking at kind of a type of cosmic alchemy.
The story slowly grew into business.
But still, a lot of people don't know that this technology actually exists.
The possibilities here are pretty mind-boggling.
We can't just believe that it was the work of these lone troubled individuals.
I had you know what it was? I have this interview with Nox Mente. I didn't even know what they were.
Yeah.
And like I'd never listened to them before or anything, and I was all worried about it. I thought that was this week, and I was listening to a bunch of their shows, and then I looked at my schedule and it was next week, but it got me all confused and I'm all mixed up. Anyway, I'm here now.
Have you talked to them yet?
No, not yet.
I was on there. They want to talk to you about your dreams.
Yeah. I'll have to break out my dream journal because I don't remember too many of them.
Yeah, it was. I thought I wasn't going to have anything to talk about, but it ended up like they got a lot out of me that I actually didn't even realize. You know, it's like being psychoanalyzed.
Yeah, I was about
or
to ask
something.
you.
I'll have to listen to your show because I didn't like know anybody except Josh, and then
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'll just listen to Josh's show and just say what he said.
I think they talked to Soraya.
Did they? Must have been earlier because only a few of them came up on. They're only on YouTube, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think they put them up on.
Yeah, I was looking on my
Podcast.
phone and only a few came up. So
It's good to speak to you.
yeah, man, I must apologize again. I'm glad you guys aren't. You're not live, right? You're not live.
No.
Okay. Cool. So I only held you up, not your whole audience.
We would have been sitting there going like, "Where's Tim Renner?" Are you recording, Rob?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. I just want you to know, Tim, that I'd never discounted you initially, unlike some people. I'm just giving them a hard time.
Unlike my future co-author and Mr. Sarai.
Yeah. Well, I guess it was just like because it had a local flavor to it, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, they didn't know how magnificent it was going to be. I can't blame them.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, it is pretty magnificent. Incredibly so. Well, enjoyed the book.
Cool.
As always, I really enjoy your writing style. I think it's I think you're a really good writer.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
And the stories are just excellent. That you collect.
I'm glad. There's more of me in this one. Obviously, I'm telling my own stories, but I don't know. I'm settling into my writing. I think I think it's a better book than Beyond the Seventh Gate. Just as far as writing and the art, the way it looks, I'm real happy with that.
When you started this whole thing, writing Beyond the Seventh Gate, we've started, by the way, Tim.
Okay.
When you started the whole thing, I mean, did you ever think that you were going to become the guy that people were going to tell their stories to, that you were going to become like a repository for a lot of people?
No, honestly, I thought I was probably going to be a footnote on the local shelf in the bookstore, where the local ghost stories are. And I thought I was going to have to wrestle to get onto that. Quite honestly, I did not expect what happened to happen. I'm very, very happy about it.
Yeah, because you're getting people coming to you nationwide now about their own experiences. Yeah,
and some of that's Strange Familiars. Some of it's the books, So, I'm happy for that.
Well, these books, even though they've got that local flavor to them, it still makes you think about your own area. Like I'm saying, like my area here or someone else's area that's in another place. Thinking about what's weird and strange, what's in the local lore. Like, it really makes you think that about that, like this book and the other one.
Yeah, I mean, Josh said on Strange Familiars, he thinks that someone should just plop me down in a place like Skinwalker Ranch for a year and just film and see what happens. And but a big part of that is the research. I love boots on the ground stuff. I love to be out in the field. I love doing that. But I also do a ton of research, old books, old newspapers, historical societies, et cetera, et cetera. It takes both to bring this information together. And I don't think that part of a reality show would be very interesting. Just, me going through newspaper archives.
Right.
This is Seraphiel, by the way. I just want to say it was really inspiring reading the book because I'm doing some research of my own on some local stuff. And, like you said, using all those resources and stories and putting stuff together, it was really inspiring.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I think when I first started, I said it wouldn't matter where I was, that I would find the weird stuff no matter where I was. At this point, I do think maybe there is something about Pennsylvania where there is a little more weird stuff here, but there's weird stuff everywhere. People can find, like, I'm sure of it. If you dig in and you start asking around, you'll find the weird stuff near you.
But I'm sure having that personal connection really helps.
Yeah, and I grew up for about 20 miles from here, so not far at all, but I'm still not from around here as far as anyone in York County is concerned that's been here for any amount of time. But my wife's been here. She was born here, so I have the instant in as far as that goes. She's technically from around here, according to York County people. I always say if someone around here remembers that your grandparents' grandparents weren't born here, then you're not from around here. It doesn't matter that, if you go back far enough, my relatives actually founded this area. I mean, the first coroner of York County is a direct ancestor of mine.
Really?
All of my relatives came through here, but it doesn't matter because people can't remember that.
Were you you were originally from across the state line in Maryland, right? Which isn't very far away.
No, I grew up in northern Maryland, like a stone's throw away, really. I mean, like I said, it's about 20 miles from where I am now.
Yeah. Because I was just there last year, and it's like you drive from Gettysburg, you're in Maryland for a little bit, and then you're in West Virginia, and then you're in Virginia. It doesn't take long to get anywhere from that area. So
yeah, and we're like dead center East Coast here. It's a great place to be if you want to. It's not terribly far to go to New York. It's not far to go to DC. It's not far to go to Philadelphia. Right. It's it's pretty nice as far as that goes.
I think it only took me 45 minutes to when I met up with you from Philadelphia. I think it was only about 45-minute drive.
Then you were hauling. It should be a little more than that, but maybe an hour and a half, something like that.
I was coming from Norristown, which is a little bit further. Something I wanted to ask you about, because you start this up in the introduction of the book where you talk about some terminology. And you use the term goblin universe and versus what you really prefer is the other. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, sorry, I'm distracted by a phone call in the background there. The goblin universe I first saw that used there was a Bigfoot book from the 1970s, and it was written by a Smithsonian scientist. And I'm trying to remember his name. I'm going to blank on it now. But he actually used it to describe all the weird stuff that tends to be related to Bigfoot, which he didn't really want to talk about. And he just said that all comes from the goblin universe. And I thought, well, that's a really neat term. And I used that in my first book as this kind of the idea that things were kind of coming from the goblin universe. But I kind of stopped using it as that seems like a defined place. It seems like there's a place called the Goblin Universe, and that's where all these things come from. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I'd like to keep it more abstract than that. So I think the other, which is I've borrowed that from the guys on Where Did the Road Go, and I don't know specifically where they got it. They might have gotten it from Patrick Harper, but I'm not sure. So I just started using that because it just feels it feels better, I think, to describe all this stuff. I think it is all related, but I don't know, that it's all coming from one specific place necessarily.
I've heard the term before from Jerome Clark in one of his books about the unexplained.
The other or the Goblin universe?
The Goblin universe, where he talks about Bigfoot, and he talks about how in the western part of the United States you have where they say that this could be the hairy hominid that is a natural creature, but the further east you go, you descend into the Goblin universe. And that's the first place I had heard it from.
I'm trying to think. Ron Murphy has a book, I think, called The Goblin Universe or something to that effect. It has Goblin Universe in the title. And he had a podcast as well called Goblin Universe. So it's been this term that's been floating around. I know since the early 70s. It's a good one. I mean, I like the idea of it, I guess, but the other feels just stranger to me and less defined.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a better terminology.
And I'm now to the point, and really this probably comes in the next book, the one I'm writing with Josh. But I'm willing to argue this point of Bigfoot being a hairy hominid anywhere. I think it's something very weird no matter where you go. And if you look into it deeply enough, it's going to get weird.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that's definitely true. That you've got this weirdness to every Bigfoot encounter.
Well, the people that are fairly insistent that it's a natural animal are like hunters who just happen to see it in the woods, walk by or even, kill a deer or something. Or people who see it crossing the road, as they're driving a car. These are the people that are like, nope, it's a real creature. Absolutely, 100%. It's like an animal. But the people who have had multiple encounters with them, who've had them come around their house, around their property, or who have, for whatever reason, they've started to interact with them, feeding them or whatever. These people very quickly will get things will get very weird for them, and they'll come back and say, yeah, I don't think it's a monkey in the woods. Yeah. So it's easy to forgive someone, and I think when people do see them, they're absolutely, they're as physical as you and me when they see them. So they can be totally forgiven for thinking they're an animal. I absolutely. But when you look at all the other data, there's something weirder going on. Plus, there's nothing in the fossil record that looks like them.
That's true. That's very true. Real quick, a little recap of Beyond the Seventh Gate for some people that may have just coming into hearing you for the first time.
Sure.
What did you talk about basically in that book?
Well, the first half of that book was devoted to sort of debunking this set of urban legends about this closed road called Toad Road in the area. And there was this crazy sort of B-movie horror story that popped up about the area post-internet time, about there being 7 gates of hell there and an insane asylum that burned down, and all the victims of the insane asylum were killed in the fire, and those that weren't were killed by townspeople in the woods around the place. There's no town around the place, by the way. It's a rural place. I don't know where these townspeople were coming from to kill the residents. But in any case, I proved that wrong very early on, and the people who I believe made up that story quickly changed that story to there being a doctor, a mad doctor who kept patients in his mansion that burned down in the same area, and that from there the story was the same. In both stories, the sort of town fathers of York erected 7 gates to keep people away from the ruins of the mansion or the insane asylum. And the story went that as you pass through each gate, things would get stranger and stranger, and no one ever returned from the 7th gate. And it's a load of hooey. Like I said, it's a post-internet creation. There are some things, unfortunately, that kind of made it stick. There was a doctor who lived right there at the end of Toad Road, unfortunately for his legacy. and he did have a gate outside of his house. And because of that, I think it helped all this kind of get tied up and made it seem more real to people. But he was not anyone who worked with patients with mental issues at all. He was a heart specialist. He was a veteran of both World Wars. He did charity work for the poor and aged around the area. He wasn't this mad doctor in any way, shape, or form. There were some of the ghost story books say that he had collections of toad statuary all over his house and all over the gate and stuff. Well, I was able to find pictures of his house at the Historical Society. Finally, I hit upon them. I found the right folder where they were, and there's no such thing around his house. It's another bit of nonsense. So unfortunately for that poor guy, he did get bound up in the story, but that really wasn't the story. What I did find is like weird stuff was happening out there. Like people did report weird stuff, but none of it seemed to have anything to do with ghosts of insane asylum patients or anything like that. And a lot of it seemed like it was cryptid activity from its description. So I started pursuing that line, and I found that I think that's probably more what was going on out there as opposed to any sort of insane asylum fire, which there was never an insane asylum there. So that's impossible.
You've done your best to dispel these myths, but do you still hear them a lot around town?
Oh yeah. I'll have people come up to me. Like I'll do a book signing at a paranormal convention or something, and I'll have people come up to me and tell me they've been through the 7 gates and they've seen the ruins of the insane asylum. And I just look at them like, no, you haven't, and they're like, and they'll insist. They'll absolutely insist they've seen it. And I said, well, I don't know where you were, but it's not on Toad Road.
Yeah.
And it gets even crazier. Like some people will tell you, well, you have to be there on a full moon to see the gates. Otherwise you won't see them. And then other people will say, well, no, you have to be there on full moon on Friday the 13th. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, like how many of these little rules do you have to make? There's just not 7 gates there. I'm sorry if that hurts anyone's feelings, but there isn't, and there never was.
But there is one.
There was one gate, yes, and through all my gate debunking, I got contacted by people, and these are older people, and these are people I like to talk to about the area because there's no influence of insane asylums and mad doctors on them. They went out there before the internet, and I got contacted by a few people, and they're, hey, there was a gate there. And so I had to kind of correct that in the new book. I was like, okay, there was a gate. There was a big iron gate there. And actually, sadly, it led to that doctor's house. But it was someplace that people went to supposedly experience spooky stuff. Like, even in as late as or as early, rather, as in late 1950s.
And you it had a name associated with it. Like it's called like Harbeth Gate.
Yeah, it was really like this was just a weird out of nowhere stories. Some guy just called me. I think it was like 8, 9 o'clock one night. I get a call, and he called my Google Voice number because I have a separate number for sightings and stuff if people want to do Bigfoot reports and everything. He called that number, said, I want to talk to you about Toad Road, and left his phone number. So I called him back, and he started telling me all these stories about going to the area. And he said, there was a big gate up there. And one woman had already kind of taken me to task for it. I was like, yeah, I know. I didn't get that in the book. And he said, I used to go to that gate all the time. It had Harbeth written on it. And he says, what do you think that means? And I said, dude, I don't know. I have no clue. I said, maybe it's the maker of the gate. And he said, I remember he got he was chiding me. He wasn't being like a jerk, but he's like, I thought you were good at research. You're not good at research. And it kind of irked me a little bit because I do a lot of research. And before we got off the phone that night, I remember he called me from Florida. So I think he did. He used to live in the area and he retired to Florida. And he told me some other local stories and so forth. None of them particularly paranormal, just more like local history. But before we got off the gate, he said, "I want to tell you something. There's a farm out there called Avalon, and I want you to know that it's not named after the Avalon, the place of legend or anything like that. It was two people. It was Ava and Lon." And I said, "Okay." And I had no clue why he told me this. And then he kind of hung up. And I'm like racking my brain all night. I know I was driving my wife crazy because I was like, what could Harbeth mean, and what does that mean? And something about it that was like, it sounds familiar. It sounds familiar. And at some point in the night, I realized I looked at my notes and I said, well, the doctor's name was Harry Belknap and his wife's name was Lisbeth. So it's Harold Belknap and Lisbeth. It's Harbeth. And it just clicked, and I was like, wow, that totally makes sense. So I called him back the next day and said, hey, I figured it out. And he goes, "Oh, you are a good detective after all." And then he says, "You don't believe any of that spooks nonsense about the place?" I said, "Well, yeah, I get a lot of witnesses, and I don't have any reason to doubt them." He says, "Oh, that's all nonsense." Then he tells me a story about a ghost cat that climbed onto his bed one night. So it's all nonsense when it's everybody else's spooks, but for him, I guess it was It was real.
We've definitely heard that one before.
Yep.
And I think everybody has something. If you push them, everybody's got something a little weird.
Yeah, I listened to those Strange Familiars you did with Clint Granberry, where I guess that he runs some like conservative talk radio show or something that he's a producer of.
He's the producer. Yeah. And
like you guys, they had these random callers and y'all were asking them, or they said, "Oh, no, never had anything happen to me. But there was this one time."
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Like and we didn't even I didn't have time to put all the calls on there. That the radio show would have been 2 hours longer, or the podcast rather would have been 2 hours longer than it was if I put all the calls. But 100%, everybody had something. I think except that one woman who said Bigfoot's a felon. I think Bigfoot's a felon.
he's just a really good felon that runs across country, and they've never caught him.
But she grew up in the same area I did, like a couple miles from where I grew up. Like, here's this random woman. So yeah, she didn't have anything weird, but had this total synchronicity where we grew up in the same neighborhood, literally the same little rural farming neighborhood.
That was weird in and of itself. Just the synchronicity. The first person that you all picked up, and it was somebody. Yeah, I highly recommend people listening to that to those shows, because it's just interesting just to hear just random people talk about their experiences.
Yeah, and we were, I don't know, Clint and I, we get along real well, and I'm trying to push him into coming on a more regular basis and just doing that, just taking random callers and seeing what happens, but we'll see. Obviously he's got his own podcast and a day job,
Right. You talk about in the book kind of we were talking about the Iron Gate. So you go into some things about kind of the significance of iron ore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's huge in the supernatural. If you go back to, this is Josh Cutchin territory, but if you go back to the fairy stories, that was one of the ways to keep yourself safe from from the Fae and to keep your child safe. And cold iron was that was the big ingredient for things to keep the Fae away. And you find that in horseshoes and cold iron. And I didn't know this until we did a episode of Strange Familiars. I just thought cold was a sort of adjective for iron, but cold iron specifically means iron worked by human hands. So it wouldn't be like raw iron out of the ground. This would be something that is worked by human hands. So cold iron, if you put scissors or an iron poker or something in the crib with your baby, you could protect them from the Fae and so forth. And the neat thing about Toad Road is, on one side you had this iron gate, this big gate with Harbeth on it. By the way, I never got to ask that guy if he was dropping me a hint when he said that Ava and Lon thing, because I couldn't find his information. Like it was a days later that I went, what the heck? Like, was he giving me a clue with that? And then I deleted his voicemail thinking, I don't need this. And then I could never get in touch with the guy because I wanted to ask him, like, were you testing me? Because that's what it seemed like in the end. It seemed like he knew what Harbeth meant. That's why he said that Ava and Lon thing. But anyway,
it could have been your future self.
Wow.
Just throw that out there,
Look at that. I love that idea, actually. I absolutely love that idea. Wow, now I have to fulfill that destiny.
You have to remember to call yourself in the past now.
From Florida. I've got zero interest in moving to Florida, but we'll see. Maybe my hot young girlfriend will drag me there after I retire.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask if I have to sleep with the future self.
Did you hear my lovely wife?
We heard her. Yeah. And we're gonna get her. If she's cool to do it, we're gonna do a Patreon a little bit about the Broken Circle, about a true crime thing. After we do this interview, so
she said she'll come over for that. Yeah.
Awesome.
There's iron on both sides. There's an iron furnace on the other side, an old iron furnace that's a pre-Revolutionary War era iron furnace that's on the other side of Toad Road. So it had this kind of iron on both sides that kind of defined it, which I find is very, very interesting as far as all the supernatural things that happen there.
So talking about Toad Road, first of all, the origin of the name is interesting.
Yeah. Now, if you ask 10 different local historians, you'll get 10 different answers on that. And there's local historians who will absolutely come out and say no one knows why it's called that. And when people say that, it drives me a little crazy because somebody knows. Somebody knew at some point. And in the first book, I thought you can find old newspaper articles that describe roads as toad roads around here. And that was just like in the spring when the spring rains come and stuff. And sometimes you'll see a bunch of toads crossing the road. They'll actually say, oh, that's a toad road. So I originally thought it must have been that. But then I found that this road was the tow path for the Cador's Creek. It runs right parallel to the Cador's Creek. Cador's Creek comes out of York. It was navigable water. It's really almost a river. And they sailed barges out of York in it, but it's not quite deep enough for real big ones. So they had to have a tow path. So Toad Road was the tow road for these barges. And I think that's probably where the name comes from. Although I did get a call from another lady who had another theory as to the origin of the name.
That is interesting. That how that would become toe to toad, and then the statues of the toads too was an interesting thing too.
Yeah, which never. Again, that's just something somebody came up with. I don't know who or why, because I did find. There's Dr. Belknap had bought this old building. It had been there for a long, long time, and he had it fixed up. He had additions put on and had it really fixed up and made it really nice. So I found all these pictures of his house, and not a one showed any statue at all, much less a statue of a toad.
And is there a toad man that people talk about?
Yeah, that's the other. So I got a call again. I get these late night calls from these old folks. I love it, by the way. Like this lady called me at midnight, and I don't know exactly how old she was. I'm just guessing from her voice. She was in her 70s. But she said, yeah, I used to go down on Toad Road, and most everybody talks about that gate. These days they'll talk about either those imaginary gates or there's just a gate that kind of closes off the road because it's no longer you can't drive it or anything, and it's private property. Or they'll talk about that gate, or they'll talk about the old iron gate. They're talking about everything on the south side, and she didn't say a word about that gate. She said was worried about so the big worry was down in the darkest part of the road, which is really, it drops down as it gets closer to the Susquehanna River. and closer to Cadora's furnace. It goes down into this kind of hollow, and it gets real close to the creek. And she said you had to be worried in there because of the Toad Man. And I thought she was talking about that Dr. Belknap again. I thought she was calling him the Toad Man because in the ghost story books it says he collected toads and had the toad statues and stuff. But something about the way she said it before, like, we got off the phone, I was like, no, wait a minute. What do you mean Toad Man? And she said, don't you know about the Toad Man? I was like, well, you tell me. And then she said, it's what it sounds like. It's this toad creature. It's like a man that looks like a toad. And she's like, it lives in the creek down there. And she said, it would come out at night. And she described it, very convincingly described a flat tire she had down in there in the early 1970s, I believe she said it was, and how frightened they were because they wanted to get out of there before the Toad Man came. And she said that, she was terrified of this Toad Man. So, and then she said, and that's how the road got its name. Now, I don't think so. I really think it's the towpath is the way it got its name. But I do find it interesting that there is a Toad Man now associated with Toad Road.
That's crazy.
It is. And then I had found an old newspaper article from 1905 that described a fish man. And this was like 8 miles north of Toad Road, so it's not far at all. And I think like it's weird enough to have a Toad Man, but then so this is the article from 1905 from the Wilkes-Barre Record. I'll just read it. Strange animal alarms residents along the Susquehanna. Fish walks like a man. York, Pennsylvania, October 22nd. People residing along the river midway between Cly and Goldsboro are mystified and some alarmed over the sight of a strange creature that has its abode in the Susquehanna. Thus far, but 2 men and their wives have seen the thing. As it was seen in broad daylight, more credence is given to the story than would be if it had been seen at night when people are more prone to see things. The strange creature, whether fish or animal, is described as being large as a man. When seen, it came up out of the water, erect like a man, and is described as looking like a man without arms. Those persons who have seen it declare that they are not the victims of an optical illusion. So that's from 1905. That's not been reprinted anywhere, but it's in my Pennsylvania Bigfoot book. I have an appendix with just other weird creatures.
Yeah.
It's in that, and it's in this book. I'm absolutely sure this woman didn't read anything about this fish man. So, I mean, is a fish man and a toad man the same thing? I don't know. They're both presumably amphibious, but they sound kind of alike, and they're not far from each other as far geographically where people had seen these things.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to say that sounds sort of Lovecraftian, but if it's from 1905, that would have predated his stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are these like frog amphibious kind of creatures in folklore. I mean, well, there's a Loveland frogman in Ohio, so we do have some in the United States that people have seen multiple times. But there's these creatures in like Slavic folklore, Hasterman, which I think is probably where Lovecraft got the name Haster from, if you want to talk about Lovecraftian. And they were these amphibious kind of river spirits. They were covered in green hair, and they had the crazy thing is they're described as having both frog and fish-like features. They kind of look like a frog covered in green hair, but the one description had them with fish tails and the other with gills. So they do have kind of both frog and fish features, these things from Slavic folklore. So it sounds completely wacky, but I'm at the point where I don't know. The weirder stuff gets, the more interested I guess I am in some ways.
Tim, did you happen to hear our show a couple of shows ago with Cisco Murdoch and Steve Stockton? Did you listen to that?
I heard probably the first half. The way I listen to podcasts, and no one should be offended by this, I love podcasts, and I wasn't sleeping for a better part of a year, and I started listening to podcasts, and they helped me fall asleep. So I do not fall asleep on people's podcasts because they're boring. I fall asleep because I love podcasts, and it's the only way I can get to sleep sometimes.
I do the same. I do the same thing.
First half.
So she talked about a story where she was with her mom, and I think she was a teenager. And they were driving through the Dismal Swamp in Virginia, and something just comes out of the swamp, and just like they thought it was like a bear or something, but it's kind of started morphing on them, and it kind of sounds a little similar to what you kind of just talked about.
Yeah, I mean, see, this is where you get into the really weird stuff, and the cryptozoologists with the capital C, they get really uncomfortable,
right,
with this kind of stuff because I mean, I don't know why they so readily accept Dogman. Dogman can't exist as a natural creature, as far as I'm concerned, like anatomically, but they're all over Dogman. They're fine with that. But then they start well,
he's the latest craze.
Yeah. But just the anatomy of something with hocked legs being upright, it doesn't make sense at all. Plus, I heard one person say that if you put a dog head on top of an upright human body, it wouldn't even be able to breathe right. It just the physics of it just don't even work. Not to mention that dogs are pretty evolutionarily excellent creatures. They've kind of evolved to this, the way they need to be. And the idea that they would evolve hands and upright walking is just, why? What would be the reason for that? But in any case, these weird creatures tend to, that's where people start getting either real tweaky about it and saying, well, that must have been, those people are crazy. But people who see a giant ape in the woods, they're not crazy. They're okay. Or they'll just, everything's a Bigfoot and then people were mistaken. You get that a lot. Where somebody will describe they saw a lizard man or something and they're like, well, you saw a Bigfoot. You just were confused,
Right. Yeah, that's there's more going on. That's for sure.
Yeah, and my point is so more people in the United States believe in ghosts than believe in Bigfoot.
Yeah,
people already think Bigfoot believers are crazy. Literally most of the United States thinks they're crazy. So why try to act like we're mini scientists? Science is never we're not in science as far as mainstream science goes. This is something we're out there. We are out on the outer edges. So we need to look at all this stuff, and we need to. If you're going to take one person's word that they saw a giant hairy ape and say, well, I'm not going to take the person's word who saw a frogman, then I think you're being kind of intellectually dishonest.
I think there's a real push for legitimacy. They really want to be taken seriously. But they really believe that, and in some ways rightly so, that the discovery is right around the corner.
Right.
We know, I hear people talk about, and it kind of drives me crazy. They apparently know all the habits of Bigfoot, and they know what Bigfoot does on a daily basis, and they commune with Bigfoot, but we haven't actually discovered Bigfoot.
That's the thing that kills me whenever I watch a documentary or I hear a podcast where someone's like, well, we used such and such as bait because that's their favorite food. It's
they like KFC,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
Krispy Kreme donuts is their favorite.
You get these folks who and I call it verbal Rube Goldberg devices. They would come up with this. So many Bigfoot trackways walk off into the middle of a field and stop.
Right.
And they come up with the craziest explanations for why this happens. My favorite is that Bigfoot turned around and tiptoed backwards through his own tracks because he would have to tiptoe, because if he just walked in his own tracks, he'd mess them up. So no, he tiptoed backwards in his own tracks so as not to mess them up. Here's the top of if you believe them, and it's a natural animal, this is an absolute top of the food chain predator with nothing to fear at all. And
I mean, a chimpanzee can tear you apart. This thing can definitely tear you apart.
Exactly. And you want me to believe they're tiptoeing backwards in their own track? For what reason? If you really wanted to make a confusing trackway, you'd walk backwards in the track so people couldn't tell whether you were coming or going. That's the way you make a confusing trackway. It's completely bizarre, the stuff they come up with to sort of explain away the bizarre Bigfoot behavior. And they'll say, I've been told many times, because I would bring up the three-toed tracks a lot, and I've been told, oh, well, that's just Pennsylvania and Boggy Creek, and the ones in Boggy Creek were faked. And it's absolutely not true. Three-toed tracks have been found all over the place. I found a book from 1976. It's never been reprinted. It's Al Berry. He was one of the guys that was with Ron Moorhead up in the recording the Sierra Sounds, if you know what they are.
Yep.
And
I don't know if these guys do, though. I don't know if they know what the Sierra Sounds are.
No.
So a group of guys recorded these, which sounds like crazy, like they call it samurai chatter.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
Yeah, they were having like presumably, Bigfoot activity. A couple of them did see creatures, but and they recorded this these vocalizations, which are apparently an unknown language. A cryptolinguist has heard them, and he says it's a language. He can't tell you what they're saying, but there's like, he's the expert, not me.
Right, it's got the right kind of patterns to be an actual language.
Exactly, yeah, the morphisms or whatever. But in any case, Al Berry was one of the guys with them, and he wrote this book in 1976. It's never been reprinted, and he talks about three-toed tracks all over California and Oregon. So this idea that they only appeared in Pennsylvania and Boggy Creek goes out the window, absolutely. The other stuff Al Berry talks about, interestingly, is like poltergeist activity in the cabin they were having up there. And the fact that they could rub their feet on the ground and make orbs appear.
But totally not related. That's a totally different thing. We're not.
Well, he actually didn't say that. He Al Berry refreshingly in 1976 was talking about this stuff and totally saying, he thought it was related somehow.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
But people since him have dismissed all this stuff. And like I said, and the three-toed tracks almost look goofy. They almost look like somebody put on rubber feet or something. They don't, but people have seen these creatures, walk by, and basically they've left these three-toed goofy looking tracks. And there was a zoologist from Baltimore in the 1970s, and it's the best quote. And it says, I think he was saying it dismissively, but I really feel like it says something about the phenomenon. He says it's almost like they forgot to finish the feet. And to me, that's brilliant. It's like, whatever this was, however this manifested, it's like they forgot to finish the feet.
Yeah. Well, it's this whole idea to me that makes me think about how Bigfoot, I've heard Josh talk about, we're kind of off on a tangent here, but I've heard Josh talk about how maybe there's a real animal called that is in the woods. And I love Josh to death, but I think that's way too complicated.
I think Josh, after the book we're writing together now, I think, I'll give you a little inside. I think he's going to have more and more trouble saying that as time goes on.
It just makes me think that this is a motif in a lot of different cultures, and it's a motif now in popular culture, which I feel that like popular culture is like an extension of folklore now, basically.
Yeah.
And that whatever it is expects whatever you are expecting to see, that's what you're going to see.
Yeah. Folklore today was probably, the popular culture of its time anyway. It's just, things change with, culturally. It's like, I'm a folk musician as well. And traditional folk songs change. It's a big game of whispering down the lane. Right. So things change a little bit. And that's just the folk process. That's what happens, and things change culturally. And I think that's what happened with these old reports. I think folklore, a lot of it was cryptid sightings back in the day, and they've just kind of morphed into these, this what we think of as fairy tales now, But they sure are describing things that look and act like the things we're seeing today.
Well, let's talk about this. Getting back to Toad Road, the car is being lifted. And I didn't think about this, but someone that is a fan of Strange Familiars and Where Did the Road Go and this show pointed out that we mentioned a couple of times quite independently, because Nick Redfern talked about it, and a guy local guy here, Christopher Coleman, talked about these like weird entities that hang out in like Lover's Lane kind of things. And basically Nick was talking about it in reference to like feeding on sexual energy. But you have some stories in the book about like people going to Toad Road and the cars being lifted and having these experiences. It's very similar to things that we've talked about.
Yeah. So these were three separate accounts, and none of these people knew each other. So the people said if something was pushing down on the back of their car, like pushing on their trunk or something. These are all from like early 70s. So these are big, heavy cars. And they kept looking out and they couldn't see what it was. And they said it happened several times. And then they finally decided to leave. And then I was at another paranormal convention. A guy came up, saw I had a book on Toad Road, and he starts telling me the story. And he said he drove out there with his girlfriend and they had parked. And they were there for a while, and he said something lifted up the back end of his car completely off the ground and dropped it.
Damn.
And, yeah. Like did it a couple times.
And we're talking like 1970s cars here, right?
Yeah, like heavy cars. That's
yeah.
And the guy said like, and they're looking out, they did not see anything. They said they couldn't see a thing, what was doing it. And, he said his girlfriend started crying and stuff. So he just, tore out of there as fast as he could. And the third one was, so there's a fellow in the first book that I just found a newspaper article. And in the article, it just said he was attacked by a hairy monster in the area. And I really wanted to find him. I couldn't find him in time for the first book. Couldn't find him anywhere. And I happened upon an old phone book that had his name in it. And I wasn't sure it was him. But I said, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to write this guy a letter, like with a stamp, snail mail. And wrote him a letter, put my phone number in there, and said, I'd like to talk to you about this incident. If you would be interested in talking to me, please call me. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call. And he said, I never thought I'd be talking to anybody about this. And repeated phone calls. I had to drag the story out of him literally over at least 6 months. I'd call him once a month. And he didn't like talking to me very much. He didn't like talking about the story. He would change the subject multiple times in our conversation. I'd have to always steer it back because he just didn't like talking about it. And he said every time after he talked to me, he'd have nightmares for 2 weeks. His girlfriend hated me. She hated when I called because, he'd wake up with these nightmares and stuff. But he finally told me the story. He said, well, what they put in the newspaper wasn't the story. The newspaper just said he was sent to the hospital with scratches on his face. He was sent to the hospital for a week. And he had gone out there and parked his car and tried to restart it, and it wouldn't start. And you find this with Bigfoot and UFOs and all this other stuff, the drain battery thing or whatever it is. And he said something came up and kept brushing against his car, and he couldn't see it, but it kept brushing against it over and over again. And he was there for hours before he said, well, I can't stay here all night. I got to go. He gets out of the car and just starts running. And he said he ran right into something. And the way he described it, says, I ran into a big hairy monster. And when he did, it beat him down. Like he had a brain injury. He had memory loss, temporary memory loss from it. When he went back to high school,
wasn't he in a coma too?
No, but he did have, like I said, he did have a traumatic head injury. And when he went back to high school, he had to have someone like help him from room to room. He was 18 when this happened, still in high school. And he didn't even remember where his classes were. He told me, he said it was horrible. So I never, like after a while, he just stopped taking my calls. Like he'd let my calls go to an answer machine and never call me back. And I'm not trying to torture the guy. I just wanted to get the story. So if he's done talking about it, I'm not going to press him on it anymore. So I never found out if he was found on the ground or if he was able to pick himself up and get to a house or what. But somehow he got to the hospital. And he told the police where his car was. They went back to retrieve his car, and it started right up for them. No problem. Just started on the first try. And they said when they found it, the back door was open, and there was the only thing that was missing was a knife with a red handle. He said that was the only thing missing from his car. So something with hands opened the back door. Could have been a person, but there's just not that many people out there at that, that time, especially, and at that time, that year in 1973 and that time of the night or early morning, as the case may be. So, yeah, he was missing a knife with a red handle, and that was that. But he never said Bigfoot. he said monster, and I brought it up, and I said, do you think it could have been a Bigfoot? And he got really quiet. He said, you know what? I never thought about that. Maybe that's what it was. So who knows? But the police told him first they said you ran into a man that was dressed in skins, and he said, no way, this is a man. It was way too big. And then they said, well, you ran into a cow, and that's I think that's what he said they put down on the actual police report.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for that, and they just don't fill them. And, people's like, well, what? They have to. We'll try telling that to a local police department. They do what they want to do. And if they're, I can't make them. If I was a big news organization, I guess I could, hire a lawyer or something and make them fill the request. But they don't do it.
I was listening to another podcast, an interview with Chuck Zukowski. Do you know who I'm talking about? He writes about the 37th parallel stuff that we actually kind of touched on the last episode. But he was talking about this, like it was a supposed Bigfoot encounter where this like guy and a girl were out there and they got attacked by Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot ripped the girl in half, and the police put it down as a bear attack.
Yeah.
Typical bear attack, ripped her in half.
Yeah.
I had it.
I mean, bears could do some damage. I mean, if you ever seen The Revenant, I would.
I had an ex-police officer on one time, and I was talking with him about this, and he said, it's not a vast conspiracy. He said, it's just, you don't want to put in your report that someone was attacked by a Bigfoot. He said, it's just going to cause you. He's like, this is somebody's career. You don't understand.
Right. And you're going to get laughed at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He said they just know it's going to make problems. So he said that's why they put down stuff like that. He said it's not a vast conspiracy. Like a lot of people be like, oh, the police know about it and they won't. No, it's just that, it has to do with making their lives easier and making their careers a little smoother.
Wasn't there a lady in the book that said that she encountered a gray out there?
That was at Site 7.
Site 7, okay.
So Site 7 is the place we talk about on Strange Familiars. It's not super far away from Toad Road, and it's very similar. It's a road, formerly public road that's been closed down. So I put the Site 7 stories in the new book because it's kind of, it's same area, same kind of deal.
What did she encounter?
I mean, that's what she described. She said because we were talking and we were assuming Bigfoot, and she said, something ran behind my car, and she said it wasn't hairy. She said it, I hate to say it, but it looked like a gray alien. And so that, that's how she described it.
Wow. Yeah. Site 7's, I mean, you've had some weird experiences out there too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I think I don't think it's Bigfoot there either, or it's Bigfoot end there as well. You know what I mean? There's just something weird going on out there, or multiple weird things that are somehow related.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the Orbs, howls, and the eerie music.
All right. That was another person who just called me out of nowhere. She was like just experiencing all this paranormal stuff, and she just wanted somebody to talk to, and she found my number somewhere online and called me. And she just started unloading with, seeing these orbs and all this stuff. And she didn't mention where it was. It was only late in the conversation where she said, I said, where was this? Where did all this happen? Was this all in one area? And she said, yeah, it was on Trout Run Road. I went, oh my goodness, because that's the road that leads right into Toad Road here. And then I kind of said, like, all right, let's go back over everything again. And she had been seeing. She worked at night. She ran a little animal rescue on a little farm there, and she would go into the barn at night and feed the animals and take care of them and so forth. And I think she had a day job, so she kind of did most of the taking care of the animals at night. And she kept seeing these orbs, going across the field. She saw a UFO that she said was kind of in a chevron shape. And she was hearing screams, and again, she wasn't a Bigfoot person. She didn't know screams were like a Bigfoot thing, but she said she was hearing screams from the direction of Toad Road, and it just all this activity. And then she described this eerie music, and it was the last thing she told me about. And it's usually the last thing anyone tells you about because it sounds so crazy. And they describe this kind of angelic singing, and I've heard people describe it in relation to Bigfoot. A lot of people say it's like the rarest sound associated with Bigfoot. You can find it, it's not a lot of people talk about it, but it's out there. But a friend of mine had experienced it in Hex Hollow, which is another kind of local haunted place here, in association with Orbs. He had seen some orbs. He was with his friends and heard this kind of angelic music associated with it. So that's like, I want to check that one off my list. I want to hear that, whatever that is. I really want to record it, but yeah, I'd be satisfied with just hearing it.
Maybe it's music of the spheres.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I have no clue what to make of that.
That's so bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, that I don't, stuff like that kind of like is very disconcerting to me. I don't know why. Just like hearing some weird music.
Well, I don't think I've ever heard any kind of case like that where any kind of bizarre, any 14 type of thing was accompanied by music.
There's actually in that Al Berry book I mentioned, he mentions I think he said it sounded like Chinese or Buddhist chanting, and this one Bigfoot was like kind of drumming and doing this like Buddhist chanting thing. And there's I think is it the Snellgrove Lake incident, the one that was up in Canada that they filmed. I'm not sure if that's what it was. It's the one when they filmed Meldrum was there. They did it for like one of the monster TV shows or whatever. And they had experienced that around there, not when they were filming that, but they had gone up at another time and had experienced that kind of singing. Like
guttural or like throat singing?
No, this is more like that.
And
like they describe that like angelic kind of, ethereal kind of singing, like really kind of pretty singing. So, and you'll find it here and there where people, Bigfoot people will talk about it, but it's, as far as I know, it's pretty rare.
But that definitely has correlation with the Fey folk stuff, right? Because their music is such a part of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of the Fey folk, this is a Site 7 incident, but you felt like you got led around. You and James.
Yeah.
got led around. Like, what happened there?
It was last fall. We went in there and we kind of parked near the river and hiked in, and it's all uphill. It's actually a mountain. It's a very, very small mountain, I think, but I think it is considered a mountain. So we hiked up this mountain, and a fairly uneventful day until we turned around, and I heard something in the weeds. I turned and looked. Just something made a little noise. I turned to my left, and it was like real brushy, like thick brush area. And it looked like there was a guy wearing a 70s like sweatshirt, like the kind of heather gray sweatsuits he used to wear in the 70s with the hood up. And I just caught a glimpse of it for a second, but it was all gray. It was, it wasn't huge. It was probably about my size or maybe even shorter. And it quick, turned to the left and kind of turned to its left, my right, and kind of dove into the brush. I never saw it again. And by the time I went, whoa, by the time James turned, he didn't get to see it, unfortunately. So I don't know what that was. It maybe or maybe not. I don't know if that paced us out or not. I kept hearing stuff to the left, but it didn't seem like when people talk about Bigfoot or these creatures pacing them out of the woods, they make a lot of noise. They make themselves known. If this was doing that, it certainly wasn't making a lot of noise, but there was more noise to our left. But, we get down and we have to, there's about an acre, maybe an acre and a half of woods you have to cross through from one trail to another. That's just game trails. And I mean, I'd done it before, and it wasn't that much woods. I knew the direction we were going, and we got lost for over an hour in this little strand of woods, and it was really bizarre. And I didn't know this was a thing. Like I happened to mention it offhand, I think to Soraya, and Josh said, "Dude, you got Pixie-led." I was like, "What?" And he's like, "No, that's a thing where people get lost in areas, you know." And he said they could even hear people's voices, and we couldn't hear people's voices, but like their friends' voices and stuff, even, and they're still lost. We couldn't hear voices, but we could hear traffic on the road. There's a road you cross under at one point, and we could hear the traffic on the road, and we still could. I mean, it was bewildering. Like we weren't saying much, but I remember we were looking at each other like, what the hell is going on here? And we finally made our way out of there, but there's no way. I should have taken us 10, 15 minutes to get through that at the most. And it took us, over an hour to get through that. It was really, really freaky in a way.
Jeez.
And I'm glad James was with me, because I don't know if I would have just gotten frustrated and sat down or something. I don't know what I would have done. So, that was the weirdest part of that day. I didn't think about it much at the time because we had seen something. So I saw this thing. So I was more focused on like, oh, wow, we saw like another kind of grayish white thing there. And then, but later on, when I think back, I was like, yeah, that was really, really weird, because there's no way it should have taken us that long to get through those woods.
Also at Site 7, that's where people talk about, one of the rumors about it is that there's albinos living in the woods.
That's the first thing that I was told. So I was asking this guy, he's a little bit older than me, and I went in Toad Road stories, and he's like, I don't even know what that is. I was like, what, really? Like, because he collects ghost stories and stuff too. And he said, but I'll tell you about this other road, and he told me about Site 7. And one of the things he told me was that there was this supposed family of albinos that lived in a shack there that would chase people out or whatever. I asked him if he ever saw him. He said, well, I caught a glimpse of him once, but he said, but they were there. They were definitely there. So yeah, there's this weird albino rumor, which is, I didn't put this together till later on, that like everything we see there is white or gray or light gray. Like everything time we've seen something, and we say flashes, we don't mean flashes of light. They're like flashes of movement that we've seen it. That fellow, that woman who saw the gray creature, she described things the same, this sort of flashes of movement, and they've been this kind of light gray and white in color.
Yeah, that's, and they also, you talk about too, like they would throw rocks at people.
Yeah, that's the other thing the guy told me. Yeah. That's what really got me interested, because that's it's a Bigfoot / paranormal thing. It's Bigfoot. It's also poltergeist. But he said you park on that road, and hobos, I believe he said, would throw rocks at you from the woods. And I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, you could park there and these hobos would throw rocks at you. I said, well, what? Anybody ever see these hobos? He said, no, they were just in the woods. So that's what, then I was like, all right, now I'm interested. Now there's weird stuff going on here. I need to dig in and look into this.
There's just random albino hobos living out there in the woods,
Is there any local history of like of isolates who just kind of went out there and did their own thing, or is there
hermits?
Yeah, hermits or
we've got hermits. Yeah, we've got hermits.
Or isolated groups of people from, I know in the colonial days, there was a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not terribly far away. We had, the Effeter cloisters and stuff, but they were more of a, religious community that isolated themselves because they believed the end was nigh, I think. Yeah, I mean, not that I know of necessarily groups of people, but we did have like some individual hermits, which is that's another great interest of mine.
Cool.
Old timey hermits.
Huh. You're not going to go out there yourself, are you, Tim? You're not going to live in the woods?
I mean,
become a hermit?
I don't think I could get my wife to go with me. I'd like to stay married, and I do have kids, but maybe someday.
And ransack campgrounds and stuff.
I mean, the raccoons are already trembling in fear, so.
I have seen so many raccoons live and dead since that. Like so many. It's insane. I've never seen so many raccoons in my life.
Have any of them like pointed at you?
We're watching you.
You killed my brother.
Your brother had rabies.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know what that is, and I think Josh told me too. When he was on Strange Familiars, he said he's been seeing tons of raccoons ever since I told him that story. So we've activated the raccoons.
Raccoon synchronicities.
Yep.
There's plenty of garbage for them to live on, so I don't think they're. It was actually funny because I was going to send this to you, but I forgot. Like a day or so after, I think we did the Skinwalker show where we talked about your raccoon experience. I pull up right beside this like exterminator vehicle, and it's got a picture of a big raccoon on it.
I have the Strange Familiars group on Facebook. People just constantly put up raccoon stuff. Like, okay, all right. And then, I had somebody comment on YouTube, of course, because YouTube is the garbage island of the internet.
Yes.
And say, "Oh, you don't even belong in the woods. You're afraid of a little old raccoon." It's like, I handled the raccoon. The raccoon wasn't the problem. The thing that freaked me out was all the weird synchronicities around the raccoon.
Yeah. I had heard that show that you did with Clint Granberry, where you guys talked about the raccoon traps. Mm-hmm. And then the next day or 2 days or so later, I see you talking about getting attacked or killing a raccoon. And but
yeah, it was nutty. And like all those synchronicities didn't come to me at once. Like it was over the course of like a day or two as I'm thinking. And Clint he's like, "Man, we were just talking about raccoons." I was like, "What?" We were, yeah. I had forgotten. I don't have a great memory.
Tim, what has been at any of these sites, what has been kind of like your most profound experience for you?
Definitely the skull that's on the cover of the book, the skull I found on Toad Road. That was really, really powerful and jaw dropping for me.
What happened to you with the skull?
So I was out there in March of 2017. I was hiking with a friend, and we had hiked maybe half the road. It's only about 3 miles, the whole road, from end to end, the closed part of it. And we, for whatever reason, he wanted to turn around. So we walked, we started north, headed south, turned around, headed back north. And on the way out, there was a raccoon skull. It was right in the middle of the trail. And I could have walked by it, but that would be unusual. I've been collecting animal skulls as long as they don't have guts and gore on them since I was a little kid. I'm kind of tuned to them in the woods. Like I'm tuned to that color. My eyes will, just kind of lock in on that. I usually don't miss them. But, I thought, well, I must have stepped over it. It was right in the middle of the trail. I picked it up, put it in my pack, and I made plans with this guy to come back in 3 weeks. And 3 weeks came, and for whatever reason, he couldn't go. And I was like, well, I'm gonna go by myself. I'm weird. I like to hike the whole road. If I don't hike the whole thing, I feel like I haven't completed it. So I go back and I get to it was right about the place on the trail where I found the raccoon skull, and I heard something up ahead, just in the brush, just moving in the brush. I looked, and I guess, I don't know, between 50, 75 yards away, something like that. Just something big. I can only tell you it was big. I saw it for like a fraction of a second or maybe a second. And it shot off. It was really, really big, bigger than anything that should be in the woods in York County. And I had somebody tell me I saw an elk, which that'd be amazing because we haven't had elk here in 200 years. So if I did see an elk, it was a very special elk, but it did not look like an elk. It looked wide. That's the only thing I say. It looked quadrupedal. It didn't look like it was running on 2 legs. But I can't tell you what it was. It was quiet and it was fast. It was bigger and faster than anything I've ever seen in the woods. And it shot south on the road. Now, 3 weeks from March till April in southern Pennsylvania, you get a lot of growth. So what was a pretty easy hike before had become just nasty. I mean, there was thorns and poison ivy and stinging nettle, and I ended up with ticks on me that day. I almost never get ticks. I got like 4 or 5 ticks that day. It was just horrible, and the trail was all muddy. It's private property. Nobody should be in there. During hunting season, people, do go in there. It's used for hunting. This isn't hunting season. Hunting season's over. This is in the, April. And not being brave, it was not bravery. I just followed this thing, and it was like I was in a trance. And it went south, and I headed south after it. And I think I probably went for, maybe a half mile or so, and maybe 3/4 of a mile. I'm not sure, but not further than we had gone on the hike previously. We had gone further than this, 3 weeks before. So what stopped me in my tracks and kind of snapped me out of this trance was at eye level in the middle of the trail, impaled on a branch, was a perfectly clean deer skull. And I had forgotten this until I was talking with Soraya, and you can actually see it in the picture, the photograph in the book. There's something placed like on top of the skull, like a little flower, a little piece of plant too, that's kind of balanced there. And I didn't think to keep that. It was almost placed at like where the third eye would be, interestingly enough. But I sort of brushed that off. I took pictures of it before I ever touched it, so that's in the pictures in the book, or in the one picture in the book. But it snapped me out of this trance, and I was like, what the heck is this? Because, a person could have put it there, but that means they brought a skull with them and hiked down in this nasty area where no one should be and impaled it on a branch in the middle of the trail at eye level for what reason? Or they found a skull when they were down there and decided to put there. I mean, it just seems, the whole thing just seemed really, really bizarre and really freaky. And people ask me, like, do you think that was a warning? Especially Bigfoot people. Like, do you think that was a warning? They're trying to scare you off. And I was like, I didn't, for whatever it's worth. That's not the impression I got. The impression I got was, oh, you like that little raccoon skull? Well, check this out. You're really going to like this. And I grabbed it. It's sitting in my my art room today. But it was really a powerful moment. And the ever since then, I go on as many Bigfoot investigations as I can. I get called, for locally, get called out and stuff. And ever since then, I'd say 70% is probably more, but I'll say 70% of the Bigfoot investigations I go on, I find skulls now. It's completely bizarre. And they're not like hidden under brush. I'm not digging around, crawling around looking for them. They're in prominent areas where I can see them easily.
You feel like something is interacting with you.
I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I can only say ever since finding that skull, I find skulls. Like I said, I've been collecting since I was a kid. I've at least doubled, possibly tripled my skull collection in the past year with these things. I don't know what this means. I don't know what this means at all. I was just on Sasquatch Chronicles, and Wes, the host, was like, I wouldn't be taking those skulls home. But my whole house is, my skulls have skulls. My daughter, she's into like the Misfits and stuff. She loves it. She's like, I love it when my friends ask me how many skulls we have, because I say inside or outside.
It's funny because my dad does that too. I mean, he probably doesn't have as large a collection, but he would walk a lot and hike, and he'd bring skulls home because he's an artist, and he would draw them and stuff too. So. Yeah,
I just love drawing them, and that's why I was originally getting them. And I'm not like Ed Gein or something. In fact, my wife will tell you if there's any gore on them at all, I'm like a wussy. I'm like, ew, I don't want that. Yeah. She'll actually pull. She doesn't care. She'll actually pull it off. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to mess with that.
Yeah, I'll just completely clean.
Yeah. I need them to be sun bleached. I'm a wimp when it comes to that.
Yeah. Well, the book is titled
Don't Look Behind You. And you can find that on Amazon. If you look up Timothy Renner, all my books come up. or you can look up "Don't Look Behind You." It's the one with the deer skull on the cover.
And it's just print right now, but there'll be a Kindle version soon.
Yeah, I'll get the Kindle version out eventually. It takes me a little while.
Well, I highly recommend it, and I highly recommend all your books, Tim.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this has been. I always enjoy having you on.
Yeah, anytime. I am a Conspirinormal fan.
Thank you. We are definitely a fan of you. We need to get you to do some artwork for us.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
Do some creepy monster.
I can do that.
All right, sir. We're gonna go on to the Patreon section for our Patreons out there. And,
Alrighty.
Stay on the line for us, Tim, and we're gonna be right. We'll be back to close out the show. Conspirinormal.
All right, so I wasn't here last week.
Yeah,
But-
Rob has brain parasites,
And I
so
also
that's
have brain
why.
parasites, so I'm slightly dumber than I was before.
I think it's one of those amoebas.
Yeah,
Could be.
Have you been using
Could be
amoebic?
the
Could be
cerebellum.
amoebic.
Have you been using a neti pot?
No, is that
Oh
bad?
man.
Yeah,
Oh,
that happened down in New Orleans or
God.
in Louisiana, I think.
Anything can kill you these
That's
days.
horrible, man. That's how you want to think about that.
Yeah, my sister uses one, and I was like giving her a hard time, but she's like, I only use distilled. But you're supposed to only use distilled water, like out of the jug, from the store. So
Otherwise, you get an amoeba in your
Yeah.
brain.
Brain amoebas, no good.
Well, amoebas they'll mess you up, man.
isn't that that's a
dysentery?
Dysentery.
isn't that an adolescent song? Amoeba,
Honestly, most of the
I don't know.
amoeba. It's good punk band.
And
You
then
were talking
multiply.
to you talked to someone last night about intelligent design. And,
Yeah, I did that. I did that by myself because both of you guys would be working at that time.
right, and you really identify with.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Randy Wysong, they hit me up about coming on. And I think we were supposed to do the interview sometime in October, but he had to cancel, and I rescheduled the end of November. And he's actually in Michigan, by the way, Rob.
Oh,
Like somewhere like in the middle or something.
somewhere in the middle or something.
Yeah, I don't know. Middle of the glove. But I mean, interesting interview, man. Interesting guy. I mean, he's a nutritionist, and he's got a background in chemistry. And I mean, I'm an intelligent design kind of guy. I'm not so much a creationist because I don't think that it just happened. But I'm also more, I guess if I had to describe what I think is like, I'm kind of like an intelligent evolutionist in that I think that evolution,
Like it
and
looks.
I think that he was saying that everything just kind of springs forth completed, but he's not religious about it. It's kind of complicated, and I didn't get far enough in the book to where I wanted to talk where I wanted to talk about a lot of that other stuff, and so I want to get him back on a second time, maybe even a third time, to talk about some of that.
About what
There's
he
a lot in that
ultimately
book.
Yeah.
about what he ultimately
Yeah.
thinks is the intelligence.
I think there's kind of a multiverse kind of aspect to it,
Yeah,
and more of a paranormal kind of aspect to it
Huh.
that he's getting to, but I haven't gotten to that part of the book. But there was just so much about disproving kind of natural selection based evolution that there was enough for an hour to talk to the guy
Right.
about.
That's interesting. See, I'm sort of on the fence about it. Like I was saying before we started recording, I don't think Darwinian evolution answers everything. I think there's
Sure.
It was a great step forward as far as how we understand things, but there's just
Yeah.
things tend to to go in like this weird step pattern. Like there's a huge leap and then there's a plateau and a huge leap and a plateau.
Yeah, I think what you describe is what's called punctuated equilibrium.
It's not as much of a gradual slope.
Yeah.
You don't see all the steps of this slow process in the fossil record. Maybe that's because it's, the fossil record is just not very complete.
Well,
you
even
get
in,
samples from here and there, and that's what.
right. Even in current evolutionary theory, I remember this from my anthropology classes about this, is there's this concept called punctuated equilibrium, which is basically what you just described. So what happens is things stay the same for a particular type of creature for a long time, and then something happens, whether that's environmental or there's something even more that changes that creature to something else.
Right.
That's actually part of I could be getting this wrong. There might be somebody yelling at the radio right now or their earphones.
We're not evolutionary biologists.
But so this has been 20 years since I took this in this class, but that's how I remember it being described to me by an anthropologist. So that in and of itself is like kind of, they would say, well, it's the environment or it's some kind of pressure that causes that to happen, which is valid, but it also could be something
Right.
else.
Reminds me of, there's a couple examples in nature that are really, really hard to explain, like the bombardier beetle. Do you know anything about that?
I'm familiar with it. But
yeah, it's it evolved. It's got these like two chemicals or whatever in its abdomen that it can spurt out, and when combined, they like cause a reaction and this tiny explosion. And for something like that to evolve, like you'd have to have millions of things born that either blow themselves up or that don't work, or that like before the one that happens to like evolve that works and can. There's a lot of weird examples like that where it's like
that's what Dr. Wysong was getting to. That's where he was talking about, like mutations and how mutations aren't a good thing. They're most usually a bad thing. So how can they actually be an engine for evolution?
Right.
And,
well, when they're advantageous is what
but
science says.
Right. Well, and you've got a long enough time span and a huge enough sample base that it is feasible that you could get something that like pops up that's like, hey, I'm something cool and unusual and great, and I'm going to dominate.
Or it could be that advantageous mutation in quotation marks is something that happens to benefit, and it comes from another source,
right?
Basically, like evolution is kind of guided in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know about. I don't think I would believe that, but I'm open to possibilities of what biological life even is, and if it's if just DNA is a design thing, either from some divine source or possibly some other kind of living beings in the universe or something.
I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and whether if this biological life is like we were talking about earlier with the AI stuff and everything else, whether biological life is just some kind of gate or conduit for some other kind of consciousness to enter into this physical realm, or if it's a way of the physical realm to observe itself, like all those theories. And I'm open to all that kind of stuff, but I think that mutation and the I guess traditional evolution, I definitely see it taking place in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, I think it's part of the equation. I don't think
But I think there's some other aspects to it. I think as far as I'm pretty ignorant about it, but as far as I know, human evolution stands right now, I think it's progressively getting the modern humans that we are now, it's progressively getting older and older. And I think a lot of estimates now are looking at over 100,000 years, possibly 200 or more of modern humans.
Yeah, I think I remember
And that
when,
stuff puts all this history into question, of like,
Yeah.
so if we had these same capabilities, then, we only started doing things 10 to 5,000 years ago, quote unquote civilizations. So, if
there's
we've been around that long, I mean,
Plenty of time for civilizations to rise and
Yeah.
fall and deteriorate and become undiscoverable.
yeah, I think we talked about 70,000 years ago was the. Did we talk about this on the show? Or maybe this was just a conversation you and I had, Sergio, but there was 70,000 years ago was the Toba supervolcano, which a supervolcano can mess things up pretty well. And it is estimated that the human population went down low. They think it went down to maybe about 1,000 people.
Yeah.
oof,
Like a very low human population. And that's considered, they considered that a bottleneck. And so 70,000 to about, 12,500 years ago to the Younger Dryas and whatever happened there. I mean, you're talking about at least 60,000 years where there could have something could have happened, risen and fallen.
because we don't
that's
understand
quite easily.
we don't understand what was happening 10,000 years ago.
Or even that could have been what wiped out the, previous grand civilization or whatever right there, too.
Yeah.
If we'd been around for 100,000 years before then, there's no reason to think that it couldn't have grown to some massive, civilization.
I think there's some distant memories that are recorded in
The myths,
mythology
Oh,
and especially like in the Bible, because if you look at like this whole concept
Not even
of
just the Bible. There's so many shared stories amongst
Right.
all the major religions.
the Greeks, the Babylonians, I mean, you get the flood story from the Babylonians essentially, or Sumerians really. But if you look at these different mythologies, I think that there's a survival. Like there's some people that believe that in the book of Genesis there's actually two different creation stories. That you've got the creation of humanity, and then the creation of Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve starts the bloodline that is talked about all throughout the Bible. But that creation where they say that the earth was out form and void, some people, and these are theologians that think that this was a memory of something bad that happened and the earth was basically recreated.
terraformed.
Probably something like the Toba volcano.
Okay.
And then you've got the cataclysm of the flood that happens later and the destruction of the antediluvian world. I find it really compelling that where Göbekli Tepe is not that far away from where the ark is said to have landed.
Yeah, you talked about that a lot.
Yeah. So I think that there's definitely this there is this memory, this remnant of a memory that is so distant it just becomes mythology.
Right.
But I was going to say about Darwin and about intelligent design that when Darwin came up with his whole concept of natural selection, they didn't know what DNA was.
Right.
It's not discovered till over 100 years later. And DNA is so much more complicated. And I really think that there's something within DNA, like Serfiel was getting to, that it's almost like there's a program there.
Yeah, it is.
And that is super fascinating. Yeah.
So you think some of the changes are predetermined, not just from external forces? Is that
No,
the
not
theory?
that's no. I don't.
I think that. I think it might be. The whole
What-
epigenetics thing is
What were you getting
fascinating,
to then
too.
with as far as DNA being part of the the process itself.
Oh no, I was saying that not necessarily like this intelligent evolution, but whether we all are DNA, all these living organisms.
Right.
Besides like when viruses and bacteria.
Yeah, proto life, or not even, or like
But whether DNA itself is an engineered thing, I guess kind of like it's almost like the deist idea of like the god that just sets the clock and it just goes,
Yeah.
something like that. Of like,
well, that's
I
kind of what
felt-
I'm saying. Like, you don't think that part of that's like programmed into the DNA itself, though?
that what's programmed into it.
The changes in the course of things.
Not necessarily. I think I think it's more of the clock set and it's just gone. But I'm not sure if I really like can buy the primordial soup.
Yeah, and Dr. Weishaupt talked about that and how
Yeah.
that's almost like
The
virtually
primordial
impossible.
soup is really
Yeah, like the further you go back in the theory, the more it just kind of falls apart. Except for this admission that they don't want to admit that. Well, we don't really know.
yeah.
We really don't.
And what is it? And is biological life? Is it an actual like? Is it a Stargate? Are we a Stargate? Is biological life so that like the spiritual realm from elsewhere can enter into this realm?
Right. Well, we
Or
do know
is it-
that the components to create it were there.
Yeah.
The maybe not the protein, the like amino acids, the basic
Yes,
compounds
yes.
and stuff could be created in that kind of environment. They were there, and
But
But
we
the
can't
leap- the leap
make
from-
them
but
form
even the
life
leap-
That's true.
now.
That's true though. That's
but-
good. Yeah.
But even the leap from that to DNA is just like light years.
Yes.
So
And he lists he in the interview and in the book he talks about the chances of it, and I mean it's absurd. I mean it's an absurd number, but
we are talking billions of years. Though.
yeah, I was gonna say that possibility that the spiritual realm, the realm of non-material, creates the material.
Right.
And we enter into that. That's basically, I think, where you're getting
or
into.
like the Gnostics
yeah,
feel that we are actually imprisoned into this.
yeah.
So it's like
The physical and the spiritual worlds are at odds with each other. Yeah,
and so this is like the punishment by the
That feels
the
appropriate.
evil
the archons.
demiurge.
Yeah, good old demiurge.
Yeah.
Right. That's a productive little discussion. See, Rob, your brain parasites are, I think,
Yeah,
helping
Rob,
you
I
out.
They're
think-
smarter than I am. Maybe I'll keep them around.
But we hope you're going to be okay, Rob. So, but we miss having you every week. But
Everyone out there send good vibes,
yeah,
prayers, whatever you do, to Rob. And
I'm gonna go to the doctor tomorrow and just find out that I haven't been drinking enough water or something,
that could be it.
or that it's brain parasites.
Or that's brain. I think you're hoping that it's brain parasites.
I've never met anyone with brain parasites.
Yeah.
I'd be like,
So if it is brain parasites and people want to give to help out Rob and Conspirinormal, where
so
do they need to go,
exploitative.
Rob?
so
go to
exploitative. Adam.
patreon.com/conspirinormal. We got lots of bonus content, a couple of new things tonight we're going to post up there for you. It's a great way to help support the show because, we spend money on web hosting and websites and just our time in general. And if you don't want to subscribe to anything and want to do a one-time donation, you can do that through our website at conspirinormal.com. And if you want to support the show, but you don't want to spend any money doing it, just tell your friends or do a nice 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen.
All right. Well, here's how the rest of the year is going to go since we don't have too much longer. Next week, we're planned to be back over at Turfiel's at Studio B. Tim Beckley, I have an interview scheduled with him. He is a UFO researcher. that lives in New York City, and also has got a lot. He had a lot of experiences with the rock community there, including the New York Dolls. So I'm really excited to talk to him about that. And then closing out the year will be Dr. Future. The return of Dr. Future. To impart some wisdom to us. And then, as we usually do, either at the end of December or the beginning of January, we will have posted our year in review episode.
Oh, wow.
As well. So
That's going to be fun.
We'll get to talk about everything from, I think, episode 196, I think is where we started.
Really?
In this year. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's getting close to 250, man. You'd be starting to think of something.
Gotta start planning the 300th episode now.
I know, right? I know. All right, guys. Well, we will be back next week on Conspirinormal.
Great parasites.